What's up, everybody? Thank you for tuning in to the Toma Todito Boxing Show. What an amazing fight that we got to talk about today. At least an amazing showdown as it was set, as it was built up to be, and it was an amazing showing on behalf of one Shakur Stevenson, who is now a unified and the Lineal champ at 130 pounds. Amazing display of boxing from Shakur Stevenson this past Saturday as he defeated and dethroned one Oscar Valdez. A lot to talk about this fight. It was aside from the build-up, aside from the hype, it lived up to it because it could have gone any other way. One punch could have changed the entire outcome. The execution of a game plan, the execution of change of game plan could have been the difference. But the control and the domination of Shakur on this fight was just one that leaves you in awe of his young talent. He's very young, he's very good, and he continues to get better. And it is very impressive each and every time out that Shakur Stevenson steps into the ring, even with certain flaws that he has shown in the recent past, and I'll dive into that. I'll dive into that, which is one of his previous fights, which, in my opinion, raised a lot more questions than it provided answers after that performance. But holy hell, he has turned it around. He has improved a complete 360 or 720 from that last performance, and we'll dive into that. A lot to dissect, a lot to cover on this performance on this night, and it was so impressive. Thank you guys again for tuning in to the Toma Todito Boxing Show. Thank you guys for continuing to support me, to support this channel, to download the episodes and to follow me. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to check out the Instagram page and follow me on Instagram. You can follow me on Twitter, and you guys could communicate with me on Twitter, on Instagram, and we'll go ahead and have it back and forth or have discussions there. I'm always willing to do so, and I'm always looking forward to hearing from you guys. Thank you guys for all the love, for all the support, and continue to spread the word. Tell your friends, tell your fellow boxing lovers, your fellow fight game lovers to follow the show and check this out. Thank you guys, and let's dive into this. I had a hard time picking a solid winner on this one, and as I got into conversations in the lead up of this fight, I wasn't able to just put my finger on who I thought was going to win. My feelings were leaning towards Shakur Stevenson. My mind's telling me, and the little bit of knowledge that I have is telling me that Shakur Stevenson was going to win this fight. My emotions, my heart was telling me that Oscar Valdez was going to be able to grind this out. I looked at the negatives, I looked at the positives, and I'm going back to previous fights, right? I'm trying to dissect this. I'm trying to look at the negatives, the positives. Eventually, I got to a point where I discarded all the negatives, aside from the last two fights that I thought were very meaningful. And there were recent fights for each of these fighters, and they were very meaningful, in which was helping me decide as to who was going to be the victor on this night. For Shakur Stevenson, a few fights ago, he ended up fighting Jeremiah Nakatila in a fight, and that's what I was referring to at the opening of this episode. A fight that, in my opinion, raised a lot more questions than it provided answers. He's a young fighter on the up and up, looking to dominate. He was very dominant at 126. This was his third fight into the 130-pound division. He had defeated Felix Caraballo. He had defeated Toka Conclary, and then he ends up fighting Jeremiah Nakatila, a lesser-known fighter, relatively unknown, when he ends up facing Jeremiah Nakatila. And And the reason to raise more questions to it, right off the bat, yes, he ends up getting the win. It ends up being a fairly one-sided decision victory for Shakur Stevenson. However, the questions that were raised on that performance were, does he recognize when he's in full control? Does he recognize when to step on the gas and take his opponent out? Does he have that it factor? Does he have that it factor to be able to close the show? Did he know that he was comfortably ahead? Did he feel it that he was comfortably ahead? Did he choose to just cruise to a decision victory rather than end the show in emphatic fashion by stoppage? He was very dominant in that, and then he decided to just cruise to a victory, a fight which, if I recall, there were fans that were upset, fans that were booing. It was one of those fights where he took a lot of criticism from the commentators, from sports writers, blah, blah, blah. But he cruised to a victory, and it was a one-sided performance on behalf of Shakur Stevenson. Those were the positives. The negatives is what I was mentioning. Is he that young that he's looking to already challenge the top of the division, the champs, and he's calling all kinds of names out, and he doesn't have that it factor yet against that opponent? Well, fast forward to this year where Jeremiah Nakatila is campaigning at 130 pounds, one division north at 135 pounds, and ended up facing and stopping the former king of 130 pounds in Miguel Burchelt, who was also debuting at 135. A long layoff since his loss to Oscar Valdez, and this is how it all ties in. He is dethroned by Oscar Valdez. Oscar Valdez hits the highest peak of his career by dethroning the king and the most feared fighter at 130 pounds at that time in Miguel Burchelt. He stops him and knocks him out in crazy fashion, face first on the canvas. Oscar Valdez becomes the king at 130 pounds, gets the WBC title. And at that time, your other champs were Gervonta Davis with the super version of the WBA title. Roger Gutierrez had just beat Alvarado. I believe it was the after the trilogy that they had, or I think it was the second fight that he took the title from Alvarado, and then the trilogy he defended the title against Alvarado. So Roger Gutierrez ends up becoming the regular champ at WBA. You had a vacant IBF title at that time, and Oscar Valdez became the newest. The WBO, was Jamel Herring at WBO at that time, and Oscar Valdez became the newest champ in that division by dethroning the most feared boxer of that division at that time, which was Miguel Burchelt. Fast forward to the long layoff after that loss. Miguel Burchelt had not fought, had not stepped into the ring. Very little was known about Miguel Burchelt, and he finally started coming out of the woodworks and starts showing videos of his training, of his comeback, his preparation, and announced that he was no longer going to campaign at 130, that a lot of weight issues he had encountered and dealt with a lot of weight cut issues. Therefore, he was going to campaign north, one division north at 135 at the heavily stacked lightweight division. He was going to move up to the 135, and his debut was going to be against none other than Jeremiah Nakatila, who had lost to the most notable fighter on his resume in Shakur Stevenson. Jeremiah Nakatila basically beat Burchelt. He beat him up for the duration of the fight, for the entirety of the fight. Nakatila looked like a completely different fighter than what we saw against Shakur Stevenson, and stopped Miguel Burchelt. Completely different fighter than what we saw against Shakur Stevenson. So it goes to the credit of Shakur Stevenson. When I saw this performance by Nakatila in the lead up to this fight, I'm thinking, holy crap, where was this guy? Why did he not perform like that against Shakur? And credit goes to Shakur Stevenson and his style that he implemented during that fight, which didn't allow Nakatila to get the punches off, to get his aggressiveness and get his flow going against Shakur Stevenson, because credit to Shakur's footwork, to his speed, to his punching power, to his jab that kept stopping Nakatila in his tracks. To date, that was the fight that people could raise, and including myself, I was thinking, this is the fight that if anything's going to go wrong for Shakur, it's going to be this fight to come back and haunt them. The Nakatila fight, because of the way that he fought that fight, just in cruise control. That was, to me, the worst performance of Shakur's young career up to this point. And on the flip side of it, Oscar Valdez, after being on top of the world, comes back and has the controversy of the anti-doping coming back, the anti-doping or failing the anti-doping test, and then the fight continued to be sanctioned because it was inside an Indian reservation, and because it was being held in an Indian reservation, then all of a sudden it was going to be to the point of allowing the fight to go on. The commission had little to do with it, and you had a Indian reservation who did sanction the fight. The commission ended up going along with it, the WBC, and then hence the fight happened. So we had his fight against Robson, Brazilian fighter Robson Conceição, who had given him headaches when they faced each other years ago, over a decade ago, and had beat Oscar Valdez. Taller, lankier, longer reach, speedy, fluid fighter, ended up giving trouble and beating Oscar Valdez. And here they go facing each other in the professional ranks, this time Oscar Valdez being the champ. And he ended up looking really, really bad against Robson Conceição. Many thought that he ended up losing, including myself. And I just thought Robson Conceição did enough to have lifted that title from Oscar Valdez. But on that night, the judges ended up seeing it for Oscar Valdez, and he retained that title and remained with an unblemished record. The negatives, the downfall to this is that Oscar Valdez never had a tune-up fight or a fight in between that one to be able to shake off the cobwebs and to be able to fix all those little issues and tweak those issues that he had against Robson Conceição between then and getting himself into this fight with Shakur Stevenson. Whereas Shakur ended up having a fight in between, and not just any fight, he ended up fighting Jamel Herring, not just the oldest of the champions at 130 pounds, but the longest reigning champion at 130 pounds. He ends up beating Jamel Herring, outboxing, putting on a masterclass against a very experienced, and like I said, the longest reigning champ of that division, a class act of a human being in Jamel Herring. But Shakur Stevenson outboxed, outpunched, outsmarted, outperformed, out everything over Jamel Herring, and had a flawless victory over Jamel Herring, and crowned himself as the newest champion in that division. At that time, as Shakur Stevenson becomes successful, we get to the point where Kenichi Ogawa was already a newly crowned IBF champ after he stopped one of my favorite up-and-coming prospects in the Singa Fusile. Kenichi Ogawa just routed him, got himself the IBF title, and he is an IBF champion now at 130. Roger Gutierrez is the sole champion to date for the WBA after Gervonta Davis vacated his 130-pound title and is now focusing on 135 and 140. So Roger Gutierrez, Kenichi Ogawa, Oscar Valdez retained his title with that performance over Conceição. Subpar performance at that, and Shakur Stevenson was a newly crowned champ for the WBO in the 130 pounds, and enter this fight. Shakur Stevenson, complete 360 from his performance against Jeremiah Nakatila, left no questions to be brought up, and provided all the answers and some. Whereas Oscar Valdez, to his credit, rather than taking up a tune-up, he could have taken up a tune-up, he could have taken up a mandatory, he could have taken up somebody in the top 10, in the lower end, or even the top 20, just for the sake of getting those tweaks and working through that stuff that he dealt with against Robson Conceição, and getting his confidence back up, and getting himself better prepared against Shakur Stevenson. Not that he wasn't well prepared, but better prepared, I guess, to deal with this type of style, because it's proven to give him headaches in the past. And it's I'm not going to put Shakur and Conceição in the same level, because Conceição is not there. Shakur is just a whole different level. But that reach, the way that those two fighters fight tall, they use every bit of their height, they use every bit of their reach, and they stand tall, and they're aggressive. That type of style is one that does not constitute a good, fluid performance for Oscar Valdez whenever he faces that type of style. So enter this fight. To the credit of Oscar Valdez, he chose to prepare. He chose to take this fight. He could have easily avoided it. He didn't. He stepped into the ring. He went Shakur Stevenson, and this is the fight that he wanted. He's not running. He was gonna do away with all the critics saying that he was avoiding Shakur Stevenson, that he was not gonna honor this fight, and he had avoided him at 126, and he was gonna do so again. And he shut everybody up. He accepted the fight. No tune-ups, no in-betweens, no running. He accepted the fight. This fight happened because of Oscar Valdez giving in to the demands and wanting to face Shakur Stevenson, wanting to put an end to all this talk and all the criticism. All this was the lead up to this fight, and we head to the fight. And what a performance it was by Shakur Stevenson again. He collects as many titles in as many fights. In his last 2 fights, he collects 2 titles. He's 5 fights into this division, and he already is a unified champ. And if that wasn't enough, the Ring magazine title came in late to the picture, and they made the announcement that the Ring magazine title, the Lineal Championship, was going to be in play for this fight. And now Shakur got a 3rd title. He is the Lineal champ of 130 pounds, the WBC and the WBO champ at 130 pounds. Now we have Roger Gutierrez out there, and we have Kenichi Ogawa as the other 2 standing champions at the moment. How did Shakur Stevenson accomplish this? The 2 ways that I saw this fight happening, aside from the negatives, and we just touched on that, long-winded, but I just touched on it, doing away with the negatives and those past performances for each respective fighter. I focused on the positives and the advantages of each fighter. For Oscar Valdez, I saw the advantage of the ring experience, his resume, playing a huge role for him. And that's what I was seeing for Oscar Valdez, his resume, his in-ring experience. 1. 2. His ring IQ, I felt was superior to Shakur Stevenson. 3. The power advantage I gave to Oscar Valdez. 4. The grit I gave to Oscar Valdez. We've seen him in the past where, with that unblemished record as he steps into the ring, we've seen him in the past fight through cuts, fight through blood, fight through a broken jaw, and grind out a victory, and figure out a way to win and turn the fight around and either stop his opponents or grind out a decision victory. Those were the advantages I had for Shakur, or for Oscar Valdez, sorry. And for Shakur on the other side, I had the aggressiveness was number 1 that stood out to me. His aggressiveness was going to play a huge role in this fight, as it has in his past. His height was going to be big. His reach was going to be big. And his speed. Aside from that, I couldn't join any of those with additional advantages that I saw, that I was identifying for Shakur. His punch accuracy, his efficacy, his combinations were going to be additional favors to, or additional advantages for Shakur Stevenson. And when I look at these advantages, my heart, my emotions were going with Oscar Valdez. My smarts were going with Shakur Stevenson. And through the many conversations that I was involved in these past few days, I just couldn't pick a winner. I couldn't pick a winner. I didn't know how it was going to go. And I just kept telling everybody, I just want to watch it. I don't want to pick a winner. I just want to watch it because it's going to be one of those that is going to be career defining for one side. And it may very well be one of those classics for years to come that people will remember and will be talking about. So I just wanted to watch it. The way that I saw the fight for Oscar Valdez for him to win, were going to be for Oscar Valdez to pressure the fighter, to pressure Shakur Stevenson, to not start slow. Oscar Valdez needed to start fast, to set the pace by way of his jab, and to get Shakur fighting on his back foot and keeping him along the ropes and near the ropes, where Oscar Valdez could execute his body attack, weakening Shakur and eventually getting to the point where he could position himself to a potential stoppage or just cruise to a victory. But he needed to start fast and set the pace from the beginning. For Shakur, the key was evident. Just like the advantages that I saw for him, he needed to keep the fight in the center of the ring where he would just pick Oscar Valdez apart. His footwork is insane. His hand speed is insane. And the way that he puts his punches together, his combinations, and the speed in which he delivers is something that Oscar Valdez was going to struggle with. He likes to fight very tall, and he uses every bit of reach that he has and delivers those punches downrange and between the gloves. And sure enough, he did that. He stood in the center of the ring. Aside from that, something that I didn't think Shakur was going to be willing to do was to walk Oscar Valdez down. He walked him down. He stood in front of him. And he was so fast and so elusive that he would get away from the big power punches that Oscar Valdez, or the majority of the big power punches that Oscar Valdez would throw at him. He managed to just get out of the way and pop back in and counter Oscar Valdez and just pepper him over and over and over. The moment that this happened, by round 2, Oscar Valdez was leaning forward. He was lunging. He was trying to catch anything, get anything to land. He was trying to gain any little advantage, any piece of leather that he could land on Shakur, he was going to capitalize on. And Shakur's footwork was just impressive from beginning to end. The moment that Oscar realized that he wasn't going to be able to reach him, he resorted to putting his gloves up and started walking with a high guard, hoping to counter Shakur. And Shakur tended to realize this and ended up peppering him on the ears, on the temple, going around his guard and down the center between the gloves. And by the end of the third and the fourth round, Oscar Valdez was already heavily marked up, and he did land some punches. Oscar Valdez did land some punches. He landed some very good punches. He landed some strong power hits, overhands on Shakur, but they were very infrequent. There was no consistency on the side of Oscar. And it wasn't because Oscar wasn't prepared. It wasn't because this was the same subpar performance that he put up against Robson Conceição. Anybody else would have lost to this version of Oscar Valdez. He was hungry. He wanted it. And again, one of the advantages that I pointed out earlier in this episode was the grit, and we saw it again. He was in there. He takes the hit, he takes the beating, and he continues to walk towards you, and he continues to want to land, and he's going to grind out however he can. He's going to try to grind out the fight to his favor and change the momentum to his favor. And he was unable to do it because he just had a masterclass of a performer, of a fighter across the ring from him and in front of him at all times. This is not a Shakur who's implementing or taking from the playbook of a Pernell Whitaker or a Floyd Mayweather or anybody else for that matter. He's not a stand and wait type of fighter. He's not a hit and run type of fighter. He's not a land one or two punches and then just run along the ropes and dance. And then there's not a single playbook that I could see that he's taken from, except he's designing his own. He's designing his very own style, and it is aggressive. It is nasty. It is effective. It is accurate. It is impressive that he stands in front of his fighters, in front of his opponents, and he smiles at them, and he's punching them, landing cleanly, and manages to get away, is elusive enough to get out of the way of oncoming fire or incoming fire at that, and returns immediately by countering and landing even more, which continues to weaken the fighters. He's not a selective fighter where he's conserving energy by being very picky with his punches. He is walking his opponents down. He stands in front of them and he beats them up. And it's very impressive to see how he manages to do that while he's smirking and smiling, because he's just seeing everything at a different speed or a different level than he's processing everything, just completely different than how his opponents are. Shakur Stevenson is, I hate to say it. No. I'll take that back. I don't hate to say it. I am in awe of Shakur Stevenson. For those of you who are not fans of Shakur Stevenson, who are not on board with what Shakur Stevenson's accomplishing, who are not impressed with his style, get ready. Because this is a fighter, a young fighter, who has not reached his peak, who is nowhere near reaching his ceiling as a fighter, and continues to improve each fight and each time he steps into the ring. He is doing some really, really impressive work in there, and I am really excited to see his ascension in the sport of boxing as he continues to write his legacy. What a career that he's putting together. What a resume that he's putting together. And the man is 18-0 with 9 knockouts. And if you look at that record, you think he doesn't have any punch power, but look at the body of work. Look at his fights and the way he's dominating his opponents. He takes control from beginning to end and doesn't take his foot off the gas. And I cannot wait until he returns. If he unifies with Roger Gutierrez, if he manages to unify with Kenichi Ogawa, or if he ends up moving up to 135 and gets himself into those shark-infested waters at 135 in the lightweight division, then holy crap, Shakur Stevenson is going to be ascending and performing impressively for years to come. I hope, with all sincerity, I hope he stays at 130 and unifies the entire division, becomes the undisputed, then moves up to 135 and takes on all available comers at that time, all available opponents at that time after he accomplishes this. I really feel that he could actually accomplish this year. Roger Gutierrez and Chris Colbert were supposed to unify earlier in the year. Roger Gutierrez ended up falling out because of I believe he became infected with the COVID virus, and Colbert ended up fighting Dominican fighter Garcia, I believe it was Hector Garcia. So he ends up fighting him, and he gets dismantled by Dominican fighter Hector Garcia. That ended up shocking that division. Chris Colbert, who was on the up and up and challenging all the top names, ends up getting dismantled by Hector Garcia. And if I remember correctly, he got stopped in that fight. Kenichi Ogawa, I believe, has a fight against Joe Cordina, I believe it is, an English fighter. And I think he has a fight coming up in June. We'll keep an eye out on that. I think Garcia would be the next opponent for Roger Gutierrez, who was Gutierrez's last minute stand-in against Colbert. So I think that's the way that's going to go. Should those two fighters be successful, I think Shakur would be able to land one of these guys late summer, and then maybe by November, December, get the other one and become the undisputed at 130 should he be successful against both of those fighters. I really think it's doable for him. Very, very, very impressed. What an amazing showing by one Shakur Stevenson. What an impressive display of heart and grit on behalf of Oscar Valdez. And no discrediting Oscar Valdez's resume. He gets his first loss in his career. This is a first blemish on his record. And I can't wait to see Oscar Valdez return. He holds the city of Nogales in high. He puts him he's brought notoriety to the city of Nogales. He puts him in high regard. He represents his family. He represents his roots. He represents, his city, very well. And he carries himself very well. He's a very humble, very soft-spoken, very, proud, fighter, proud of his heritage. And he carries his emotions on his sleeve. And I can't wait to see him return. I'm a big fan of his. Obviously, the last two performances, the one performance I was really critical of was against Robson Conceição, but there's nothing to take away from him when he faces and he's willing to face the elite fighters and the best of the best. And in this case, it was Shakur Stevenson, and he doesn't come out on top, but that's what makes resumes. That's what makes great fighters, when they're willing to face the very best opposition. Oscar Valdez, this fight happened because of him, not the other way around. Oscar Valdez had the leverage. Oscar Valdez had the pull, and he made this fight happen. This fight happened, and we got to witness it because Oscar Valdez agreed to make the fight. Don't get that messed up. That's why we got to see this fight, not the other way around. Everybody else could have kept talking, and they could have kept saying, and Shakur would have been saying that he's ducking, and the whole year would have gone by, and the fight wouldn't have happened. It's because Oscar Valdez said, let's put an end to this, and let's get in the ring, and let's fight. I'm willing to take on all comers. I'm not running from anyone. And he made the fight happen, and he was bested. He put his title on the line. No excuses, no caveats, no special rules or special attachments or arrangements for this contract. It was what it was. He got in, he faced Shakur Stevenson, and he was bested. He has a blemish on his record. I can't wait for Oscar Valdez to return. And maybe, just maybe, if Shakur doesn't decide to go after the other two champs, Oscar Valdez could very well get himself into a big fight against Roger Gutierrez or face Kenichi Ogawa for the IBF title. Very well get himself another title, or possibly unify if Shakur decides to get distracted with one of the 130 fighters or a bigger name that ends up calling him out or coming out, like somebody at 135. He's called out Lomachenko in the past. He's called out, you name it. He's called out Gervonta Davis. He's called out Devin Haney. He's called out, you name it. He's out there, and Shakur Stevenson's willing to take on anybody. He's willing to take on anybody who thinks they're great. He wants to prove that he's better. He's got a chip on his shoulder, and he's not gonna stop until everybody knows Shakur Stevenson and until he becomes a household name. So if Shakur Stevenson continues the route of the big fights, or at least immediately gets distracted by some big fights, big money fights, Oscar Valdez could continue blue collar working and taking titles and get his hands around those two other titles on behalf of Roger Gutierrez or Kenichi Ogawa. Even those two fighters, Roger Gutierrez, Kenichi Ogawa, they face each other. Those are two firefighters, right? Firefights waiting to happen. Those are two bombs away type of fighters with a lot of power and a lot of speed on their behalf. And those will be fun fights to watch against Oscar Valdez, or to watch against one another, or to watch them face Shakur Stevenson and unify. Those are not easy tasks for anybody. Kenichi Ogawa, Zinga Fusila, that fight was something else, where they just went back and forth at each other. And, that was a phone booth style fight. Roger Gutierrez, the elusiveness, the speed, the power behind that speed. He's another type of fighter similar to Shakur, where he likes to stand in front of his opponents and just stand and bang. That would be a fun fight for an Oscar Valdez or against Shakur. We'll see how those routes play out, but Oscar could keep chopping away at this division and get himself back into another rematch type fight against Shakur Stevenson down the line, 1 or 2 years down the line, depending how long it takes him to get back on top, should he decide that. But we're watching how it's all developing, and Shakur Stevenson is at a point where he's just collecting names and collecting titles. I hope he unifies this entire division should he decide to. Other than that, man, I mean, the sky's the limit for this kid. I am excited and I am happy that I'm at a stage where I'm able to watch and enjoy and analyze his fights as well as Oscar Valdez and the many other great fighters that we have in the sport of boxing today. If 2021 left off in a good note where a lot of people said that it was possibly one of the worst years of boxing in their memories. I don't know what the hell they've been watching, but 2021 to me was one of the best years in boxing that I have witnessed of recent memory. And even going back to the last decade, I think 2021 was one of the best years in boxing, and it left off, or 2022 picked up where 2021 left off. And we started having quick action this year. I'll leave you guys with that. Awesome performance by Shakur Stevenson. Congratulations in your new Lineal WBC and WBO 130-pound champion, Shakur Stevenson. Man, super impressed. I'll leave you guys with that. I'll catch you guys on the next episode. Take care of yourselves, and thank you guys again for all your continued support and your love. And don't forget, check me out on Instagram, Twitter. Continue downloading the shows, subscribe, and spread the word. We'll continue growing the show. Have a good one, guys. Good night.